played we played everywhere. Whether you liked us or not,
For decades, Eddie Van Halen was considered the unchallenged titan of rock guitar. His innovations didn't just change music, they destroyed the old rulebook and rewrote what a guitarist could be. From finger tapping to tone crafting to stage presence that electrified entire arenas, Eddie didn't simply play the guitar, he redefined it. But behind the flash, behind the roar of crowds, behind the revolutionary solos that left the world stunned, Eddie Van Halen had a quieter side, a deeply thoughtful musician who was, above all else, a fan. Despite being idolized by millions, Eddie never believed the myth that surrounded him. He knew exactly who shaped him, inspired him, challenged him, and pushed him to become the legend he eventually became. For years, fans speculated about it. Interviews gave hints. Conversations leaked fragments. But Eddie rarely spoke openly about the artists who truly shaped his genius. Some expected him to name only technical monsters. Others believed he admired only players from the golden era of rock. But when Eddie finally opened up, revealing the 10 guitarists who profoundly influenced his life and music, the list shocked almost everyone. Some names were expected. Others were surprising. And a few were so personal that they revealed a side of Eddie the world never truly knew. This is the emotional, musical, and deeply human story behind Eddie Van Halen's 10 favorite guitarists, and why they meant everything to him. Long before Eddie Van Halen became a guitar god, he was a quiet, curious kid who simply loved sound. Music was in his blood, literally. Born to a father who was a professional musician, Eddie grew up in a home where instruments weren't luxuries, they were necessities. But what shaped him most wasn't talent alone. It was the way he absorbed every note, every style, every emotion from the players who came before him. Eddie and his brother Alex were raised in a world of classical training, not rock. Their father pushed them into piano lessons, demanding discipline and perfection. Eddie hated the rigidity of it at first, but what he didn't realize was that it was building the foundation he would one day explode into something entirely new. The precision, the ear training, the phrasing, these became the hidden weapons that separated Eddie from every guitarist of his generation. But Eddie didn't worship classical musicians. He worshipped guitar heroes. He spent hours lying on the floor with headphones on, absorbing every nuance of the legends who dominated the airwaves. He didn't just hear music, he studied it. He broke it apart. He rewired it in his head before he ever rewired an amp with his hands. These early influences were powerful, emotional, and deeply personal. They were the fuel that lit the fire of a young genius. Eddie often said that the guitarists who shaped him weren't necessarily the flashiest players, they were the ones who played with soul. The ones who could make a single note sound like a scream, a cry, a laugh, or a confession. And before he ever stepped into a studio, he already knew the kind of guitarist he wanted to become, one who made people feel something. His earliest inspirations came from blues, rock, funk, jazz, and even pop. Eddie was never limited by genre. To him, a great guitarist was a great guitarist, period. He admired players who broke rules and players who honored tradition. He admired innovators and tone wizards. He admired risk-takers. And most of all, he admired authenticity. Before the world ever heard Eruption, Eddie had already built his identity from pieces of the greats who came before him. Each of the guitarists on his list left a fingerprint on his soul. Each one taught him something unique, how to bend a note, how to craft a tone, how to speak through the instrument rather than just play it. Some inspired his technique. Some inspired his sound. Some inspired his attitude. And some inspired the way he lived his life. But it wasn't until Eddie finally revealed his 10 favorite guitarists that the world truly understood the mosaic of influences that created him. In that list were giants, innovators, pioneers, and a few choices that surprised even his closest fans. The first names on his list were the ones who built his musical foundation, the icons whose records he wore out as a kid, the players he tried to imitate before eventually surpassing them. These were the men who unknowingly shaped the future of rock through a shy Dutch immigrant with a cheap guitar, unstoppable passion, and a mind bursting with musical ideas. These early heroes didn't just inspire Eddie Van Halen. They helped create him. And the next part of his journey reveals exactly who they were. When Eddie Van Halen finally opened up about the guitarists who shaped him, the first names on his list were the giants, the men whose styles became the bedrock of his own musical identity. These weren't just musicians he admired, they were the architects of everything he would one day become. Each one left a deep imprint on Eddie's ears, his hands, and his heart. The first and most obvious influence was Eric Clapton. Eddie never hid his obsession with Clapton's work in Cream. He listened to those records endlessly, every day, until he practically inhaled every solo, every bend, every vibrato. He didn't try to mimic Clapton's tone, he tried to understand his thinking. Clapton taught Eddie that guitar playing wasn't just speed or volume, it was emotion, structure, and conversation. To Eddie, Clapton was the first guitarist who sounded like he was speaking through his instrument. Another towering figure on Eddie's list was Jimi Hendrix. While Clapton taught him discipline, Hendrix taught him freedom. Hendrix wasn't bound by rules, and neither was Eddie. Jimi showed him that the guitar wasn't just a tool, it was a universe of possibilities. Effects, feedback, wild bends, unconventional phrasing, Hendrix opened the door, and Eddie sprinted through it. But Eddie admired Hendrix for something deeper than showmanship. Hendrix played with fearless passion. Every performance felt dangerous, alive, unpredictable. Eddie loved that. Then came Jimmy Page, the master of atmosphere. Eddie devoured Led Zeppelin albums, fascinated by Page's ability to make the guitar sound huge, mystical, almost cinematic. Page taught him how to layer guitars, how to craft textures, how to think beyond riffs and solos. Eddie would later apply this knowledge in Van Halen recordings, creating tones and harmonics that felt otherworldly. But Eddie's list didn't end with the holy trinity of rock gods. He had a profound love for Jeff Beck, a player who constantly reinvented himself. Beck's fluidity, his use of dynamics, and his refusal to compromise artistry for popularity deeply impressed Eddie. He often said that Beck was one of the few guitarists who could tell a story without playing fast or loud. In Eddie's words, Jeff Beck made the guitar talk in a way nobody else could. Ritchie Blackmore was another formative influence, dark, neoclassical, fiery. Eddie was mesmerized by Blackmore's precision and dramatic flair. There was something regal about Blackmore's playing that pushed Eddie to explore scales, phrasing, and harmonic experimentation in ways he never expected. Deep Purple became a band he studied intensely, absorbing Blackmore's intensity and discipline. And then there was Pete Townshend, a name that surprised many fans. Townshend wasn't known for intricate solos, but Eddie admired him for something far more important: power, energy, rhythm. The ability to command an entire stadium with a single chord. Townshend taught him that the guitar wasn't just a melodic instrument, it was a force of nature. Eddie carried this lesson into every live show he ever played. These guitarists formed the backbone of Eddie Van Halen's musical DNA. They gave him technique, emotion, reckless abandon, structure, mystique, and power. But what made Eddie unique wasn't that he copied them, it was that he took pieces of each and built something entirely new. Yet some of the names Eddie revealed later shocked the world. Players from unexpected genres. Artists with unconventional styles. And influences that showed just how wide his musical universe truly was. Those surprising picks, and the stories behind them, made Eddie's list more personal, emotional, and revealing than anyone ever imagined. When Eddie Van Halen finally revealed the full list of his favorite guitarists, the world expected the usual legends: Clapton, Page, Hendrix. And yes, they were there. But then Eddie went deeper. Much deeper. His remaining choices exposed a side of him that few fans ever saw: the student, the experimenter, the tone chaser who drew inspiration from unlikely places. These weren't just rock icons, they were innovators who helped Eddie reshape the sound of modern guitar. One of the most surprising names was Allan Holdsworth, the jazz fusion virtuoso whose fluid, horn-like phrasing left Eddie in awe. Holdsworth wasn't a mainstream guitarist, but to Eddie he was a revelation. Eddie once said Holdsworth played things he could barely comprehend, and even admitted he once offered to build him an amp just so he could be part of Holdsworth's world. Eddie studied Holdsworth's legato technique and harmonics, and though he never imitated it directly, you can hear the influence in Eddie's smooth, gliding passages. Holdsworth expanded Eddie's imagination, proving that true magic often lies outside the comfort zone. But the surprises didn't stop there. Eddie also named Alex Lifeson of Rush as a major inspiration. To the casual listener, Lifeson was overshadowed by Neil Peart's drumming or Geddy Lee's vocals. But Eddie knew better. He admired Lifeson's atmospheric sensibilities, his chord choices, and his ability to blend complexity with raw emotion. Lifeson's introspective textures helped shape Eddie's approach to rhythm guitar, the part of his playing most people overlook. Then there was Brian May of Queen, another pick that seemed obvious to some but was more profound than fans realized. Eddie didn't just love May's melodic solos, he loved his inventiveness. The homemade guitar, the layered harmonies, the orchestral arrangements, May represented the idea that limitations could become superpowers. Eddie adopted the same philosophy when he built the Frankenstrat, turning scraps of parts into the most iconic guitar of the 20th century. May wasn't just an influence, he was a kindred spirit. One of the biggest surprises, though, was Eddie's admiration for Prince. While known primarily as a pop and funk icon, Prince was a ferocious guitarist, fluid, soulful, and fearless. Eddie loved that Prince could play anything: rock, blues, funk, jazz. Prince's versatility inspired Eddie to break stylistic boundaries and never box himself into one genre. The two men shared a rare trait: they both made the guitar an extension of their personality. Another unexpected pick was Chet Atkins, the country legend whose fingerstyle precision left Eddie shaking his head in disbelief. Eddie adored Atkins for his accuracy, warmth, and playfulness. What made this choice so fascinating was how different Atkins' style was from Eddie's. But that was the point: Eddie saw value in every form of mastery. To him, technique was universal, no matter the genre. And then came one of the most personal choices of all, his brother, Alex Van Halen. Not a guitarist by trade, but Eddie insisted Alex belonged on the list. Eddie believed rhythm was the soul of music, and Alex shaped the way Eddie thought about timing, energy, and intensity. Their bond wasn't just musical, it was spiritual. They challenged each other, pushed each other, and reinvented rock together. Including Alex wasn't sentiment, it was truth. These surprising picks revealed the full depth of Eddie's musical universe. He wasn't shaped by rock alone. He was shaped by jazz fusion, orchestral layering, funk brilliance, country precision, and family chemistry. Eddie didn't just admire these players, he absorbed them, transforming their influence into something uniquely his own. But even with all these legends on his list, there was something deeper to Eddie's choices, something emotional, reflective, and intensely personal. And that truth finally emerged in the closing chapter of his journey. Eddie Van Halen's final reflections on his favorite guitarists were more than a simple list, they were a roadmap to his soul. As he reached the later years of his life, he often spoke about how music had been both his escape and his salvation. And when he discussed the guitarists who shaped him, there was a softness in his voice that revealed just how deeply he understood the power of influence. For Eddie, greatness wasn't about fame, money, or technical showmanship. It was about authenticity. He admired musicians who meant what they played, those who bled into every note, who didn't just perform but communicated. "It's not about how fast you can go," he once said. "It's about whether someone believes you." This mindset shaped his entire career, and it explained why the guitarists he loved ranged from blues icons to hard rock innovators. They weren't chosen because of charts or accolades, they were chosen because they changed the world in their own way. What made Eddie truly special was the humility behind his genius. Despite being hailed as one of the most groundbreaking guitarists of all time, despite creating techniques that changed rock forever, Eddie still saw himself as a student. He never stopped learning, exploring, experimenting. Even in his final years, when illness limited his strength, he still picked up a guitar whenever he could, chasing new sounds like a teenager discovering music for the first time. Those close to him say Eddie talked often about the responsibility of being an artist. He believed that every musician carries the torch passed down by the ones who came before. And in his mind, his favorite guitarists weren't just heroes, they were the ones who handed him that torch. From Eric Clapton's emotion, to Brian May's precision, to Alan Holdsworth's impossible technicality, Eddie saw pieces of them in his own work. Their fingerprints were on every harmonic, every solo, every song. Eddie also hoped younger players would feel his influence the same way. Not to copy him, but to leap further. To go someplace new with the foundation he helped build. If someone takes what I've done and makes it crazier, he said, that's how music keeps growing. And that's exactly what has happened. Thousands of modern guitarists, from rock, metal, pop, fusion, and beyond, cite Eddie as the reason they ever picked up an instrument. Some copied his tapping. Others copied his tone. But many more were inspired by something deeper, his courage to break the rules. And perhaps that's Eddie Van Halen's greatest legacy of all. He didn't come to reshape the guitar, he simply refused to let limits exist. He taught musicians everywhere that innovation isn't about perfection, it's about curiosity. It's about following the sound in your head, even if no one else understands it yet. In the end, Eddie's list of favorite guitarists wasn't just a ranking. It was his way of expressing gratitude. It was a love letter to the people who made him believe music was worth living for. And in sharing it, he left behind a final reminder: every great artist stands on the shoulders of giants. Today, Eddie's music continues to inspire millions. Aspiring players still learn Eruption as a rite of passage. Fans still feel the raw energy he poured into every performance. And guitarists of every generation still look to him not only as a pioneer, but as a mentor they never met.